Mickey Cohen thought he owned Hollywood the way he owned judges, cops, and politicians, through fear that made powerful men cross streets to avoid his shadow. When the legendary mob boss summoned Steve McQueen to a smoke-filled Vegas back room in 1969, he expected another celebrity to grovel for permission to exist in his world. What happened next would teach Cohen that some people learned about fear in reform schools where real monsters wore uniforms instead of expensive suits, and that intimidation only works on people who haven't already survived worse than anything you can threaten them with. The casino chips suddenly sounded like rattling bones in a graveyard. If you want to witness the untold stories of Hollywood's most dangerous power struggles, subscribe now. 1969 Las Vegas, Nevada. The Flamingo Hotel's private back rooms, where real business was conducted away from the neon glamour and tourist crowds that provided convenient cover for negotiations that couldn't appear in any legal documents or corporate minutes. These soundproof chambers had witnessed more consequential decisions than most government offices, where handshake agreements moved millions of dollars and casual conversations determined who prospered and who disappeared from public life permanently. The air hung thick with expensive cigar smoke that couldn't quite mask the metallic scent of fear that permeated spaces where civilized conventions were suspended in favor of more direct methods of conflict resolution. This was neutral territory where different kinds of power could meet and test themselves against each other according to rules that had been established through decades of violence that left no witnesses except the desert sand. Mickey Cohen, 55 years old, sat behind an ornate desk that had been positioned to create maximum psychological advantage over anyone who entered his domain. The legendary mob boss had built an empire through understanding that fear was more valuable than money, because fear could generate unlimited money while remaining renewable through periodic demonstrations that proved consequences for defiance were permanent rather than theoretical. His compact frame carried the kind of presence that had nothing to do with physical size and everything to do with reputation for violence that had been earned through encounters where negotiation had failed and alternative methods had provided decisive results that eliminated future disagreements. Those cold eyes had witnessed more death than most coroners, ordered more punishment than most judges, and controlled more territory than most politicians. Tonight, Cohen had summoned Steve McQueen to discuss what he considered unauthorized use of his city by celebrities who had forgotten that entertainment in Las Vegas required approval from people who owned more than movie studios and had access to enforcement methods that transcended legal systems. Steve McQueen, 39 years old, entered the back room with movements that carried none of the deference that most people automatically displayed when confronting legendary criminal authority. Fresh from establishing himself as Hollywood's most bankable rebel, he understood that this meeting represented an attempt to establish hierarchy that would determine whether his career continued according to his own vision or someone else's requirements. His pale blue eyes scanned the room with analytical attention that suggested he was measuring everything according to standards that had nothing to do with respect for criminal reputation, and everything to do with tactical assessment of potential threats that might require immediate response rather than diplomatic accommodation. McQueen had requested this meeting to clarify what he considered interference with business arrangements that didn't concern organized crime interests. But he understood that Cohen had agreed to the meeting because he wanted to demonstrate authority over celebrities who had achieved success without acknowledging proper hierarchies. Steve McQueen, Cohen announced, his voice carrying authority that had been earned through decades of making people understand that defying Mickey Cohen was synonymous with accepting consequences that extended far beyond professional inconvenience to include physical damage that would serve as permanent reminders of inadequate respect. "Mickey, thanks for taking the time. Time is what I have plenty of. Patience is what I'm running short on." "How so?" Cohen stood up behind his desk, movement that created subtle shift in room dynamics that made everyone present understand they were witnessing demonstration of power that had been refined through years of controlling conversations, through psychological pressure that preceded physical pressure when psychological methods proved insufficient. "I'm hearing things about your Vegas activities that suggest you don't understand how business works in my city." "Gambling debts?" entertainment contracts, personal appearances that happen without proper consultation with people who provide protection services for visiting celebrities. And you think my activities require your consultation? I think your activities require my approval, along with appropriate consideration for services that ensure visiting celebrities can work in Las Vegas without encountering problems that might interfere with their ability to complete their obligations. The threat was delivered with casual tone that made it clear Cohen expected submission rather than negotiation, understanding rather than resistance, immediate compliance rather than extended discussion about terms that weren't negotiable. "Mickey, can I ask you something?" "Certainly." "What makes you think I need protection services in Las Vegas or anywhere else?" Cohen smiled with expression that mixed genuine amusement with something that looked like anticipation of violence that would provide entertainment more satisfying than any casino could offer. "Because protection services aren't optional for people who want to continue working in territories where those services are available. They're insurance policies that guarantee celebrities can maintain their careers without encountering accidents that might damage their earning potential. And if I'm not interested in purchasing insurance, then you're not interested in maintaining your career in territories where that insurance is the difference between prosperity and permanent retirement from public life." McQueen walked closer to Cohen's desk, his movement creating psychological pressure that challenged the mob boss's assumption that criminal reputation automatically produced deference from civilians who understood the consequences of defying organized authority. "Mickey, let me tell you something about protection and insurance and understanding how business works in territories controlled by people who think fear is more valuable than money." Cohen's expression shifted slightly, understanding that McQueen was approaching territory that most celebrities avoided through immediate submission or diplomatic retreat that acknowledged superior power without requiring demonstration of that power through methods that left permanent evidence. "I'm listening. When I was 14 years old, I was sent to Boys Republic because every authority figure in my life had decided I was too dangerous for normal juvenile facilities. Reform school filled with kids who were just as angry and damaged as I was, supervised by guards who understood that fear was the only language that worked with children who had learned not to trust anyone who claimed to have their best interests in mind." The confession carried weight that made Cohen understand he was no longer dealing with typical celebrity who could be controlled through threats about career consequences, but with someone whose background included experience with institutional violence that had taught lessons about survival that transcended entertainment industry concerns. "You want to talk about protection services? I learned about protection in dormitories where bigger kids would beat you unconscious if you didn't prove you were willing to fight back regardless of odds against winning. I learned about insurance policies from guards who would put you in solitary confinement if you didn't demonstrate proper respect for authority that was backed by methods that left marks nobody would investigate." Cohen listened with professional attention that mixed respect for legitimate credentials, with calculation about whether those credentials posed actual threat to his established methods of controlling civilian behavior through reputation, rather than direct confrontation. "I learned about territories controlled by people who think fear is more valuable than money from administrators who understood that some children couldn't be reformed through conventional methods and required alternative approaches that broke psychological resistance through sustained application of consequences that made compliance seem preferable to continued defiance." McQueen was now standing directly in front of Cohen's desk, close enough that his words carried personal rather than general implications about the relationship between authority and resistance. "So when you suggest that I need protection services to work in your city, when you imply that my career requires your approval to continue, when you assume that I'll submit to authority because that authority is backed by reputation for violence, you're not educating me about how business works in Las Vegas. What am I doing? You're showing me that you've never encountered someone who learned about fear from people who were actually dangerous, instead of just pretending to be dangerous for business purposes." The challenge was complete and unambiguous. McQueen had revealed background that Cohen couldn't dismiss through typical intimidation methods, claimed experience with violence that predated criminal reputation, and suggested that reform school had taught lessons about resistance that organized crime couldn't overcome through standard techniques. Cohen understood that he had miscalculated the situation by assuming that all celebrities were vulnerable to the same methods that had proven effective with people whose toughness was manufactured rather than earned, through circumstances that had left permanent marks on personality and perspective. Steve, are you threatening me? I'm explaining why your threats don't work on people who survived worse than anything you can deliver. You want to damage my career? Reform school taught me that careers are temporary and survival skills are permanent. You want to provide physical consequences for defiance? Reform school taught me that physical consequences are educational opportunities that make you stronger if they don't kill you. And you think reform school experience makes you tougher than people who've built empires through methods that have eliminated more dangerous opponents than troubled teenagers? I think reform school experience taught me that authority without justice is just organized bullying, and that the only way to stop a bully is to prove you're more willing to accept consequences than they are to deliver them. The room had gone completely silent except for air conditioning that provided soundtrack to Confrontation that both men understood would determine whether Cohen's established methods remained effective against celebrities who possessed authentic rather than manufactured toughness. Mickey, I came here out of professional courtesy to clarify that my Vegas activities don't require approval from anyone who doesn't sign my paychecks. You can accept that clarification, and we can both focus on our respective businesses without interference. Or you can test whether reform school taught me everything I need to know about handling bullies who mistake reputation for capability, and assume that threats work on people who've already survived circumstances that were worse than anything those threats could deliver. Cohen studied McQueen with expression that mixed professional respect with calculation about whether this situation required escalation that would prove his methods remained effective, or accommodation that acknowledged some people possessed authentic resistance that couldn't be overcome through standard intimidation techniques. Steve, you've got more substance than most of the pretty boys who come through Vegas thinking their celebrity status protects them from real-world consequences. And you've got more sense than most bullies I've encountered, smart enough to recognize when someone isn't going to fold, regardless of pressure applied. Both valuable for avoiding unnecessary conflicts that serve nobody's interests. Both necessary for maintaining respect without having to prove it through methods that create problems for everyone involved. Cohen extended his hand toward McQueen with gesture that acknowledged mutual understanding between people who possessed different kinds of authentic toughness, but shared recognition that some conflicts were better resolved through professional respect than through escalation that would test capabilities neither man needed to prove. Steve, your Vegas activities are your business, no interference from my organization as long as those activities don't create problems that require our attention, fair enough. And my career decisions remain my business without consultation requirements from anyone who doesn't have legitimate business interests in those decisions. The handshake confirmed agreement that had been reached through demonstration of mutual respect rather than submission to superior authority, understanding that both men had learned something valuable about each other's authentic capabilities without requiring proof that might have created problems for everyone involved. The Flamingo Hotel's back room returned to its normal function as neutral ground where different kinds of power could be tested and measured, having witnessed rare example of criminal authority encountering civilian resistance that couldn't be overcome through standard methods and required accommodation rather than escalation. Years later, when people asked Mickey Cohen about his most educational business meeting, he would describe the night he learned that some celebrities possessed authenticity that transcended entertainment industry manufactured toughness to reach territory where reform school experience provided better preparation for handling intimidation than any criminal reputation could overcome through traditional techniques. McQueen returned to Hollywood with understanding that authentic toughness was recognized and respected, even by people whose power was based on methods that most civilians couldn't survive, proving that some lessons learned in reform school provided preparation for adult challenges that formal education couldn't anticipate or address. Subscribe for more untold stories from Hollywood's most dangerous power confrontations.